Ed Coan is known as the greatest powerlifter of all time, sort of the Michael Jordan of powerlifting, and for really valid reasons. The first being that he combined pound for pound strength, something you normally see in the lighter weight classes, with absolute strength, something you normally see in the heavier weight classes. He crossed both of those together in his performance, totaling more than 10 times his body weight and doing it with genuinely massive lifts like a 1,038 pound squat and a 901 pound deadlift. And he did this under same day weigh-ins with no specialty bars, no deadlift bars. This is an unreal blend of the pound for pound and the absolute strength world being crossed together. The next reason is that he did this in multiple weight classes, not just one. He dominated the 181 class, then moved up and dominated the 198 class, then took over the 220 weight class, then moved up and dominated the 242 weight class. And his longevity was unmatched. He was doing this from his teens to his 50s. He was putting up over 2,300 pound totals in his mid 40s. So he dominated the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and went right into the 20-teens. Is John Haack lining up to become the next Ed Coan? Is John Haack our modern day Ed Coan? John has dominated the 181 weight class, the 198 weight class, and currently setting records in the 220 pound weight class. So he's literally dominating the same classes Ed Coan did in the same order. His lifts are also very comparable to Ed Coan's, and that's what I want to get into in this video. And I want to make this abundantly clear. None of this is to pit the two against each other. Ed is a legend, and his legend status stands forever in cement. John Haack, in my opinion, is the current greatest of all time powerlifter when it comes to modern day actively competing powerlifters. Because again, he checks off multiple different boxes, not just one box. The big one, in my opinion, being that pound for pound absolute strength crossover. And let me take one quick second to explain that, because that is such an important detail in this discussion. Physics dictates, right? This is not an opinion, this is a law of physics. Physics dictates that it is more possible for a being to lift multiple times their body weight when they are lighter in body weight than it is for someone who is heavier in body weight to do so. So what I mean by that is it's gonna be more probable for someone to deadlift 4 times their body weight if they're weighing, say, under 200 pounds than it is for someone who weighs 400 pounds to do that. Absolute strength is just all out sheer massive weight being moved regardless of the body weight ratio. So the 1,000 pound squats, the 700 pound benches, that's an example of absolute strength. So what Ed Coan and John Haack both have done and are doing is amazing. They're totaling 10 times their body weight. John Haack's benching 3 times his body weight raw, but they're doing it with absolute strength sized numbers, with 1,038 pound squats by Ed and 606 pound benches by John, and both of them are deadlifting over 900 pounds. Put that in perspective, guys. Back in the 20-teens, George Lehman set the US deadlift record with 909 pounds. And George weighed over 350 pounds body weight and was like 6'3". George was a massive human being. Ed and John both did this weighing just barely over 200 pounds. So that's absolutely insane. Now let's get into looking at their stats side by side. And there are differences here. It's not gonna be a 1-to-1 ratio. Ed competed at a different time than John and under slightly different standards with different variables than John. One big example being that Ed competed under same day weigh-ins. So he would step on the scale and then have to compete only a couple of hours afterwards. Whereas the federations John competes in offer 24-hour weigh-ins. So you can weigh in and then you have 24 hours to eat up and fuel up before you actually have to lift. But we're just gonna look and see if the big picture is at least comparable. It began with the 181 pound weight class. Ed set his best total in that weight class at only 20 years young, with a 782 pound squat, a 452 pound raw bench, and a 791 pound deadlift on a stiff bar, totaling 2,025 pounds. Absolutely ahead of its time back then. John Haack set his best 181 total at 26 years old, so he was 6 years older than Ed was, with a 688 pound raw squat, a 512 pound raw bench, and a 799 pound raw deadlift, just about 800 pounds on the deadlift at 181, giving him the famous 2,000 pound raw total, 2,000.7 pounds. Totally raw. And I specify raw because this is where some of those differences come in. Ed squatted equipped, but then do the rest of the meet totally raw. He would bench and deadlift raw. Ed's 782 pound squat was done in a squat suit and with knee wraps. And if you're not familiar with powerlifting, people don't realize this. They see the bodybuilder at their local gym wrapping their knees for the leg press. Those are usually cheap knee wraps with no actual wrapping technique. Those are glorified knee sleeves. A knee wrap, when you get a real knee wrap, And this gets intricate, guys. There are knee wraps that are designed to be worn with squat suits. There are knee wraps that are designed to be worn raw with just knee wraps. And there are different ways to wrap them. If you get somebody who really knows good wrapping technique and can wrap them well, it can make a massive difference, especially if you have a good quality knee wrap designed for your style of lifting. I asked Eric Lillybridge once what he thought knee wraps add to a squat, and he said on average probably about 10% if you have good knee wraps that are wrapped well. However, that's modern day equipment. The equipment Ed used back then was not as assistive as it is today. By the way, if you're into knee wraps or knee sleeves or wrist wraps or belts or anything lifting, Nick10 is the official discount code from markbellslingshot.com. Every single thing on that website is 10% off using the code Nick10, and it never expires. Link is in the info box below. So at the 181 class, Ed Coan's squat was almost 100 pounds heavier than John's, but the question is, could you get 100 pounds out of a squat suit and good knee wraps? Today, absolutely, but with the equipment Ed used back then, that's a little harder to say. Either way, Ed obviously has a phenomenal raw squat. I'll get into that a little bit later in this video, what his actual raw squat was. So I'm not taking anything away from him. And this was back in the era when raw powerlifting was not really a popular thing like it is today. So wearing equipment like that was more of the norm. So Ed wins the squat here, but he did it with equipment on. But John Haack got to do his deadlift on a deadlift bar, which is a slight advantage. A lot of Ed Coan's deadlifts were done on a stiff bar, and Ed still managed to go head to head with John in numbers, which is incredibly impressive. This is just another example of how the variables are a little bit different here and why the comparison isn't direct. So John, you could say, had an advantage with the deadlift using a deadlift bar in the 24-hour weigh-ins. Ed, of course, had the advantage in the squat, but all in all, it came down to just a 25-pound difference in the final total. Both gentlemen moved up to the 198-pound weight class. Ed's best squat in a meet at this weight class at only 21 years old was 859 pounds. Again, that was equipped, squat suit and knee reps, but my goodness, is that massive at that weight class. He had a 502-pound raw bench and an 859-pound raw deadlift at 198 pounds body weight. His best total in this weight class, 2,205 pounds. Keep in mind that massive squat and deadlift were both done in the same meet. The bench was done in a different meet, so the math won't add up. I'm showing you what the best total he ever did was, his best bench, and then his best squat and deadlift in a meet. John Haack's best 198 performance was done at 27 years old, where he squatted 760 pounds. He bench pressed 589 pounds raw and deadlifted 903 pounds raw on a deadlift bar, bringing us to a difference of only about 51 pounds on the total. Next up is where things get really, really interesting. The 220-pound weight class. This gets interesting for a few reasons, okay? The first is that this is where our data kind of ends, because John Haack's progress is kind of to be determined. He's in the midst of still filling out this weight class. He has weighed in as light as 204 pounds in the 220 weight class. He was 210 pounds in another meet. I just texted him the other day. He's currently a few weeks out from another massive meet, so stay tuned, because in a few weeks, all these stats could be adjusted and updated. Currently, at the time of this video, October 2023, John's only weighing 216 pounds. So John hasn't even filled out the 220-pound weight class yet, which means in theory, we have not seen the best he can deliver in this weight class. Whereas Ed Coan not only filled out and maxed out his ability in this weight class, he then went on to the next weight class higher and dominated that one too. So we have the full completed account of Ed's history, whereas John's, we gotta wait till the next episode comes out still. But looking at what we have so far, and keep that in your head, this is just a so far comparison to be continued. Ed's best performance in this weight class came at 28 years old, when he squatted 959 pounds, benched 546 pounds, and deadlifted his famous 901-pound deadlift, raw on a stiff bar, giving him an insane 2,405-pound total, 2,405 pounds at the 220 weight class at 28 years old. John's best performance in this class to date so far came at 29 years old, so about the same age, where he squatted 782.5 pounds raw, just in sleeves. He benched 600.7 pounds, a raw 601-pound competition bench. And he deadlifted 903.9 pounds, basically 904 pounds raw on the deadlift, giving him a 2,270 pound total, 2,270 pounds. That right there is a beautiful comparison. And of course, there are caveats and differences as always. Ed's deadlift was so damn easy, and it was on a stiff bar, and it was way back before its time. Back then, lifts like this weren't even thought of. Now, John, of course, had a deadlift bar. John, again, is lighter than Ed was. John is still underweight. John is still not filled out in this weight class yet. Ed Coan's squat. Now, it is an equipped squat, of course. That's an advantage, but let's give credit where it's due. Up until now, the squat differences have been under 100 pounds. This is the first time where Ed really cranked that gap to a 182 pound difference. And Ed had a really strong raw squat as well. I couldn't find footage of it, so I asked Ed Coan myself, and he told me that he squatted 865 pounds totally raw, not even wearing knee sleeves, and that was walking the bar out. So I'm excited. Stay tuned. We still have more to see from John in this weight class. He's just getting started, whereas Ed finished his weight class, then went on to the 242 weight class. Ed dominated with a 2,463.5 pound total, squatting his famous legendary 1,038 pound squat. A fun fact is, despite that squat getting white lights and officially counting on paper, Ed himself does not like counting that squat because he feels the depth wasn't as good as his normal squats are. He instead counts his 1,019 squat as his best true squat, which shows the kind of character Ed has and how much he respects what he does, because the 1,038 pound squat was given white lights and officially counts on record. And what about gym lifts? Random lifts not done in meets, and that's always a fun topic because who doesn't love gym lifts, right? Ed Coan did some insane lifts in the gym. He squatted 950 pounds twice for a double for 2 easy reps. And yes, it was equipped, but to be fair, his squat suit was only halfway on. He had the straps down, so he wasn't even maximizing his squat suit. John, not even filling out his weight class yet, still getting started, squatted 804.7 pounds exactly, 805 pounds, that's rounded to. Ed's best bench. There is video footage of him benching 555 pounds for an easy double. So I have no problem believing his raw bench. Definitely in the 580s. That's not hard to believe at all. When it comes to John's best gym lifts, he has done 606 pounds raw in the gym, which is absolutely unheard of. Again, weighing just a hair over 200 pounds. He's currently 216 now. He's basically my weight. I'm 205. And John's best deadlift in the gym is a whopping 915 pounds. Again, just weighing a hair over 200 pounds. So when we look back at the recap, comparisons, the 181 class, they were neck and neck, only a 25 pound difference in totals. Ed had him on the squat, but he had some assistance on the squat. John had him on the bench, raw, fair and square. Absolutely neck and neck on the deadlift. John had him by a few pounds, but Ed's was on a stiff bar and same day weigh-ins, which is very impressive. In the 198 weight class, Ed had him on the squat, but got to use a squat suit and knee wraps. John had him on the bench, fair and square. John had him on the deadlift, but got to use 24-hour weigh-ins and a deadlift bar. In the 220 weight class, Ed had him by miles on the squat so far. Neck and neck on the deadlifts. Of course, Ed Coan's deadlift was done under same day 2-hour weigh-ins and on a stiff bar, which is a feat of strength in a setting we've not seen another 220 pound person do in a meet since Ed. So I have to give credit where it's due when it comes to Ed's 900 plus pound deadlift. John, of course, wins fair and square on the bench press. John's underweight and just getting started. Can he fill out the weight class and do even more is the question. And then from there, does he continue on to match Ed's longevity? Can he go as long as Ed did in the weight class domination and the powerlifting game? And only time will tell. To be continued.